Hello, I'm Shawn O'Malley, one of your hosts for the SPEC MIX BRICKLAYER 500. I'm out here in New Berlin, Wisconsin at the District Council Training Center. I'm along with Mike Rolfe, lead judge coordinator for the SPEC MIX BRICKLAYER 500. Mike, we're going to go through a lot of different topics today to help our judges dial in what's the important nuances they need to figure out to judge a wall and have the best quality. We've got a lot of sophisticated tools here that are special and unique to our event, but that's going to help them in a lot of different areas, to include height, plumb, joint thickness to include both bed joints and head joints, tip brick, voids, chipped, lipped brick, brick orientation. Those are just a few of the criteria that we're going to be looking at. As we come back to our wall, we're building it in progression, but we want you to take a look at the starter courses as we need them to be before the start of the competition. There's a couple of key elements that we want you to identify and make sure that they're in place before we get going. We have 20 CMU stacked end to end for their starter courses, 2 courses high, 40 brick per side, creating 80 total brick for 1 double withe. What about starter pins? These are important. We need to make sure that they're in place. There are 3 of them, 1 on each end, 1 in the center of the working side of the wall. We're going to use those later on for our quality control measurements. Most importantly now is after they completed their initial 60 minutes of the competition, we had to identify the last completed double withe. What is it? What it means is both courses are filled in, 40 brick on each side for a total of 80 brick. That's going to be your last completed double withe. It's important. You're going to be given a little marker so that we can go through, find that course, put yourself a little flag. While we're at it, we're going to identify the starter course. Now we have a section of wall that we're going to use for additional judging criteria. Now that we've identified the last fully completed double withe, we can determine our brick count. This is one of the first things that we want you to do after they finish the initial 60 minutes. The way that we do that's really simple. We've identified that last completed double withe. We're going to count the number of full courses laid during the competition above their starter course. And then we're going to count all brick up to 2 courses above that last fully completed course on each side. With that, we can come up with our count. Another thing that we're not allowing during the SPEC MIX BRICKLAYER 500 are clip bricks. As a mason gets ahead on bond, we don't want him to throw in a partial piece to make up bond quickly. That's going to be a deduction and something that the judges need to look for during the event. You were looking for a lot of stuff, covering up brick orientation. Also, did the mason make an honest attempt at cutting his wall flush? As we look down this wall, he did a great job, with an exception right here. Doesn't look like he made an honest attempt at actually cutting that wall. That's going to be a deduction. Our next step is identifying the height of our wall. Does it fall within the criteria that we've laid out? 1/4 inch is what they get. Pretty unsophisticated, our method. We're going to measure in 3 different key locations those pins that we put in at the start of the event. We're going to measure from the top of the pin or from the bottom, but be consistent throughout. That last completed double withe that we've already identified, we're going to measure from that pin to that joint. We'll do that in the 3 locations, come up with an average, and they've got 1/4 inch to work with from there. There's 9 plumb points on our competition wall. Our masons have been instructed to leave their levels that they use during the competition on the wall. That's the level you're going to use to check it out. Earlier, we identified that last completed double withe. It comes into play again here now. We are going to actually plumb and judge between the first brick laid during the competition and that last completed double withe. Those are the areas only that fall within this criteria. Anything above it, it doesn't matter. If it's out of plumb, don't score it. Starting on your wall, you're going to encounter many leads that are quite plumb, very easy to judge. Now we've come to a location with an obvious area of concern. It jumps out at you, but really it's not a concern. We have our SPEC MIX custom gauge, which measures 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch. That's the tolerance for the plumb. You notice right here that there's a very large gap, and it's obviously more than 1/4 inch. It doesn't matter. That's the first brick laid. We're going to start plumbing from that location and moving up. There are other areas to be concerned with. We're only going from the first brick laid to the last completed double wide, and in this case, we put our gauge in there, and this wall still falls outside of tolerance. We'll use our keel. This person's going to lose 50 brick. In this situation, it's very unique because we have a convex and a concave lead. But remember, the picture might look pretty exaggerated, but we're only going between the first course laid and the last completed double wide. So when we put our level up on the wall for plumb, if we can get our gauge in there and there's wiggle room, that'll be outside of tolerance. He will get hit with a deduction in that point. But if this were not able to get in, that would fall within tolerance. Something to keep an eye out for. Some of these walls get a little tricky. As you look, you might have to position your level in different areas, maybe lower or higher, depending on the situation, to see if that falls within tolerance or not. This particular lead may look all sorts of out of skew. In your training as a judge, in so many years' experience, would tell you, well, that's going to be a deduction. But the way the rules are written, we're going to judge between the first course laid and the last completed. If we were to just throw our level up on there, you can see it is drastically out. Nobody wants to see that. But the way that the rules are written, those courses that qualify, we put it on the first course laid, last completed. You can see our gauge can't penetrate there. It's less than 1/4 of an inch. That's not a deduction. This is a perfect example of something you can encounter. In this situation, we have a belly in the wall. And sometimes it's going to require that you actually hold your level over the outside to get it plumb and check it from the other angle. There's some unique situations that you're going to encounter. Don't be afraid to move your level around. See what works best for your situation, and always seek assistance from one of the head judges if you have a question about it. Some of these criteria are very difficult to judge. You're going to encounter unique situations all the time, but we've brought you some special tools that you can use to make life just a little bit easier and also be consistent. We're going to talk about head joints right now. Head joints fall between 3/4 of an inch and 1/8 of an inch. That's pretty liberal, so we don't find too many occurrences of this, but you might. What we're looking for is anything that is very large and we can get our tool into and spins easily without friction. That's going to be a hit. And also, we're looking for anything really small. Look how tight this one is. I can't get my 1/8 inch end into that joint no matter how hard I try. That's too tight, that's too big. They're both going to be deductions. So we will get our keel, mark those, and write it down on our paper. We're also going to talk about bed joints. Yeah, it's a tough criteria. In my opinion, this is the most difficult one. You've got 1/4 inch to 5/8 of an inch. We've got a special tool. Now it's going to be your job to be efficient, look at all those joints that are laid out there to see which ones actually fall within criteria and which ones fall out. Don't be afraid to scrape the wall. If you've got some mortar in an area that you need to judge, feel free to scrape that down. Don't disturb the brick. But we are looking for areas where, again, if we can't get our tool into that joint, that's going to be too small, too tight. But what about a situation where we can get it in there, but we can't turn it? That's going to be the benefit of the doubt to the contractor. He's not going to get a deduction for this. In order to get a deduction, they're going to have to be able to put it in, and it's going to spin freely. Keep an eye out for it. There are ways to move quickly about this. You got a lot of ground to cover. You're working in teams. It might be beneficial to have one person sighting down a wall. And once you find a bed joint deduction, that entire row is eliminated from that side of the wall. Move on to the next. We do have some tools, maybe some markers that you can put in place so you know which walls have been eliminated or which joints have been eliminated, so you can be more efficient in your task. As the clock's winding down, our teams are trying to get it in as many brick as possible in the last seconds of the event. One of the most popular errors to find is another tip brick or a speedboat as they're motoring down the wall. We're going to come back later and actually find that we're going to check this with our digital level. Teams have laid as many as 800, 900, even 1,000 bricks, and it's your job as a judge working with your team to identify potential ones that are outside of tolerance. What's tolerance? You got 1/4 of an inch within 1 foot. We're going to use a digital scale on this one, working with your teammates. We're going to show you some tips and tricks to help expedite the process, but also be accurate. Working with your team members, consider sighting down half the wall at a time, from course to course to course. If you see something, direct your partner to go check it out. He's going to check from the top of the brick. It's going to be important to clean the surface of it. On the top course, not a problem. But when you get into the middle of the wall, it could be more difficult, and you're going to really have to do a good job of cleaning off the joint to make sure you're on a straight line. Teams are allowed 20 voids, and that's considering after a 20-minute striking period. We don't see too many of these actually happen, but it can occur. We want to share with you, how do you find a void and what qualifies? If there's an area in the wall after striking that a mason could reasonably fill this in, going from 1 brick on each side, if it fills in, it doesn't count. If you can't fill it in with the mortar that's available there, it's going to be a deduction. That's 1, they're allowed 20. Two of our key elements for quality standards are chip brick and brick orientation, also known as the shiner. We're going to show an example of each one of those right now. Sometimes as the masons get going really fast, they can overlook a key element on the unit that they just put in the wall. Maybe they just laid a chip brick without them even knowing it. Speed is everything, and as they get moving fast, they run down the wall, and as they sight down, they might notice that they laid a brick with the wrong orientation or a shiner in the wall. Judges can look for this during the event, somebody trying to mask and cover up a mistake they made. You might have made some observations and noticed, hey, they got a shiner over there, or oh, I gotta go back and try to find that chip. In this case, this is when you're gonna verify it, identify that chip, obviously quite large, larger than the size of a dime. We're gonna make sure that it's marked well with the keel that you've been provided. Also, to the same extent, you saw that brick orientation out of place, we're going to go back over and we're going to put a mark on it. Sometimes these brick can be a little bit tricky depending on the year. You might have brick that have a big stamp on it. That's easy to find a shiner on something like that. Other times it's not quite as obvious. We're also going to be looking for lipped brick. Any true craftsman is going to take shame in this one. But this is a speed competition and they're driving hard. They have a 1/4 inch tolerance in order to meet for lipped brick. I want to show you what a 1/4 inch would look like using our custom gauge with a 1/4 inch thickness. This is actually how it would look. Now, in our situation here in the wall, you might not see the entire brick being over a 1/4 of an inch. If it was equal to a 1/4, it would fall within. Anything beyond is out. Using our gauge, if we see an area that is suspect, we'll put it up flush to the wall and see if there's a groove. If we feel a lip that's going to fall beyond the 1/4 of an inch, it's going to be a deduction, and you're going to have to make note of it. Well, Mike, we covered a lot of bases here in Wisconsin today. We talked on a lot of important topics. We used a lot of tools. All this stuff to give those judges a little extra knowledge, some tips and tricks to make them move a little more efficiently and consistently throughout stall to stall. We need these in place so that we can maintain those high quality standards that we need as we search for the next SPEC MIX Bricklayer 500 World Champion.